The snow came sideways that morning, thick, relentless, like the sky had decided to erase the whole city of Halifax in one sweep of white. Wind howled through the harborfront glass towers, bending flags, shaking traffic lights, swallowing sound. Somewhere inside that storm, Malcolm Reed kept driving. The clock on his van dashboard glowed 9:42 a.m. The delivery was due at 9 sharp. The tires spun on black ice, traction lights flashing red like silent accusations. He gripped the wheel tighter, jaw set, heartbeat sinking with the wiper blades. "Come on," he muttered to the engine, to himself, to life in general. The heater hissed tired air. In the passenger seat sat a thermos of coffee gone cold, and a small drawing his daughter Zoe had slipped into his jacket pocket that morning. A stick-figure man holding a box under falling snow. A crooked sun smiling above. Under it, in pink crayon, she'd written, "For Daddy's good day." It wasn't turning out that way. When Malcolm finally pulled up to Arctinova's glass building, a sharp, mirrored fortress of the city's elite, the security guard barely looked up. "Loading dock's full. Use main entrance," he said, not seeing the exhaustion in Malcolm's eyes. Malcolm jogged through slush, carrying a sealed package marked Confidential Investor Sample. His boots left wet prints on the polished marble as he reached the elevator. He checked his phone again. A red warning blinked on his delivery app. Late. 10 performance points. Upstairs, the world looked different. The air smelled of espresso and money. Screens glowed with graphs and data feeds. People in dark suits glided past like they were born knowing which way to walk. Malcolm hesitated at the glass doors labeled Clara Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer. He knocked. A voice answered, cool, precise. "Come in." Clara stood behind her desk, framed by a window that looked out over the frozen harbor. Her hair was neat, her posture straighter than truth. When she spoke, it was like being cut with clean ice. "You're 42 minutes late," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "Do you realize how many millions that just cost us in investor trust?" The room stilled. The assistants froze mid-keystroke. Malcolm opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Ma'am, the roads." "I didn't ask for the weather report," she snapped. "I asked for punctuality." He stood there, snow melting off his jacket, dripping onto her spotless floor. He wanted to explain the jackknifed truck on Barrington, the stalled traffic lights, the salt truck that slid sideways. But what would be the point? People like her didn't hear excuses. They heard inconvenience. "I did the best I could," he said quietly. Clara finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, light gray, the color of storm water. "Your best," she repeated, "is failure at this level." She turned to her assistant. "Suspend his account with NorthTrack. Immediately. We'll handle the delivery internally." Malcolm's throat tightened. "Please, this is my livelihood. I've got a daughter." "I don't make exceptions," Clara interrupted, "and I don't negotiate with incompetence." The words hit harder than the wind outside. He didn't argue. He just handed the package to the assistant and stepped back, hearing the faint ping of the elevator behind him like a countdown to irrelevance. By the time the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of Clara again, untouched by the storm, untouched by him. Outside, the snow had thickened into white silence. Malcolm walked to his van. The city around him blurred into frost and exhaust. His delivery app vibrated. Account suspended. Performance review pending. He sat behind the wheel, staring at the message until the letters bled together. The heater rattled weakly. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the mix of anger and humiliation pressing against his ribs. He could almost hear Zoe's voice in the back seat, her question from last week. "Daddy, what happens if you lose your job?" He'd smiled then. "Then we make another one." Now the words felt hollow. The drive home to Dartmouth was slower. Streets were empty except for plows groaning under the weight of new snow. In every window he passed, people warmed their hands over mugs. their lives glowing in golden light while his felt dim and gray. When he reached the small duplex on Windmill Road, Zoe's pink coat was already visible through the frosted window. She was kneeling on the couch, pressing her palms to the glass, watching flakes fall like miracles. He parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there, watching her laugh to herself, drawing hearts on the windowpane. She had her mother's smile, open, fearless, forgiving. Malcolm closed his eyes. For a long moment, all he heard was the muffled world outside, the distant horn, the hum of the van's dying engine, the wind whispering against the windshield. Then he whispered back, "We'll figure it out, Zoe. We always do." He stepped out, his boots crunching the ice. The snow hit his face like small, soft reminders of everything he couldn't control. Inside, warmth hit him like mercy. Zoe ran up, hugging his leg. "You made it home before the storm got worse," she said proudly. "You're fast." He smiled weakly. "Not fast enough today." But he knelt and hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her bubblegum shampoo, anchoring himself to what mattered. Behind them, the small TV played a local weather update. Blizzard warning in effect across Nova Scotia. Avoid unnecessary travel. Malcolm looked at the screen, then out the window toward the city skyline, swallowed by white. Somewhere in that maze of glass and power, Clara Whitmore was probably reviewing numbers untouched by the people who made her empire run. He turned off the TV. "Let's make cocoa," he said. Zoe cheered, running too. The kitchen. As he stirred the pot on the old stove, the hum of the wind outside grew louder, like a storm gathering not just in the sky, but in the space between who he was and who he might have to become. Something told him this wasn't over. Not the snow, not the job, not the woman who'd called him failure. Somewhere, deep in that storm, their worlds were already on a collision course again. And when they met, it wouldn't just change his life. It would test what he believed about justice, dignity, and the kind of courage that keeps a father standing when the world turns cold. Stay with this story. What begins with a blizzard and a broken man will melt into something you'll never forget. Keep watching. The storm hadn't eased. It only learned to whisper. By nightfall, Halifax was nothing but wind and white. The streets below Malcolm's window looked abandoned, the kind of quiet that only comes when the city surrenders. The lights along Windmill Road flickered like tired eyes trying to stay awake. Malcolm stood by the sink, rinsing 2 mugs of half-finished cocoa. Zoe had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under her pink blanket, her crayons scattered across the coffee table. He smiled faintly, wiping his hands on a dish towel. The world could rage all it wanted outside. In here, he had warmth, and he had her. Then it happened. A sound tore through the night, the kind of sound that wakes instincts before thoughts. A metal scream followed by the hollow crunch of impact. Malcolm's head snapped toward the window. Outside, near the intersection, a black SUV had plowed into a utility pole. Sparks rained from torn wires, lighting up the storm like lightning frozen midair. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, pulled on his boots, and ran. Snow hit his face like needles. The road was slick, treacherous, the wind slicing sideways. When he reached the car, steam hissed from the hood, the smell of antifreeze and burning rubber thick in the air. He yanked at the driver's door, stuck. He slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, until the latch gave with a metallic groan. Inside, the driver was slumped over the wheel, the airbag deflated and streaked with blood. "Hey, hey, can you hear me?" Malcolm shouted over the wind. The woman stirred. Her face turned slightly toward him. Blonde hair loosened from its tight bun, a bruise forming on her temple. Eyes half open and glassy. It took him half a second to recognize her. Clara Whitmore. For a moment, everything in him went still. The woman who had humiliated him this morning now sat broken before him. Fragile, human, bleeding. He could walk away. No one would ever know. But then, through the storm, he heard Zoe's voice echo in his memory. Be kind, even if they aren't. Malcolm muttered under his breath, "Damn it," then reached in. He unbuckled her seatbelt, careful of her arm, and pulled her out into the snow. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline made her weightless. Her breath came in shallow bursts against his shoulder as he carried her up the block. The street was deserted, phone signal dead. Ambulances wouldn't make it through this weather for hours. He had one choice. Back home, he kicked the apartment door open with his heel. Warmth and the faint smell of cinnamon and wax met them. The lights glowed soft, the radiator humming. He lowered Clara onto the couch, the same couch where Zoe watched cartoons every morning. Her designer coat was soaked, her wrist scratched. She blinked weakly, disoriented. "Where?" "You're safe," Malcolm said. "You crashed. Couldn't call for help. I live close." She tried to sit up, but the pain folded her back down. He knelt beside her. "Don't move. You might have a concussion." Her eyes darted around the small apartment, the clutter of books, the paper snowflakes taped to the wall, the tiny tree in the corner strung with dollar store lights. This wasn't her world. She looked small here. From the hallway came the soft sound of footsteps. "Daddy?" Zoe stood there, rubbing her eyes, hair tousled, teddy bear in one hand. She stared at the stranger on their couch. Malcolm softened his voice. "We have a guest, sweetheart. She was in an accident." Zoe blinked. "Is she your friend?" He glanced at Clara, bruised, proud even in pain, and said quietly, "She will be, if we're kind." Zoe nodded solemnly, like she was being handed a mission. She tiptoed closer, clutching her teddy bear. "Hi," she said. "I'm Zoe." Clara looked at her, this small, fearless child, and something in her hardened expression cracked. "Hello," she whispered. Without another word, Zoe reached for her crayons and paper. "I'll draw you something. It helps when you're hurt." Malcolm watched from the kitchen, shaking his head in disbelief. This was his daughter, seeing no status, no past, just a person who needed comfort. He filled a mug with warm water, grabbed the first aid kit, and returned to the living room. "You hit your head. You need to stay awake for a bit," he said. Clara took the mug, hands trembling. "Why didn't you leave me there?" Malcolm paused. "Would have been easier," he admitted, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "But I've got a kid watching everything I do." Zoe held up her drawing. It showed a stick figure pulling another from a crashed car under falling snow. Above them, in uneven letters, "When people fall, others lift them." Clara stared at the paper. Her lip trembled. "You made this?" Zoe nodded proudly. "That's you and my dad. And that's me watching." For the first time, Clara smiled. Not the practiced kind she gave investors, but something real, unguarded. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Malcolm adjusted the blanket, careful not to meet her eyes too long. "Rest now. The roads will clear by morning." She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes. The tension in her jaw eased. The snow outside thickened again, pressing against the windows like the world trying to get in. In the half-light, Malcolm sat across the room, watching her breathe, watching his daughter doodle beside the tiny tree. The room smelled of wax, cinnamon, and survival. And for one fragile moment, everything, the storm, the humiliation, the fear, paused. He didn't know it yet, but this night, this single act of stubborn compassion was about to rewrite everything he thought he knew about power, forgiveness, and what it truly means to keep someone safe. What happens next will test kindness against corruption and heart against power. Stay with this story. It's only just begun. The smell of cheap coffee was the first thing Clara Whitmore noticed. Not the pain in her head or the weight of the blanket around her shoulders, but that rich, slightly burnt aroma that didn't belong in boardrooms or hotels. It was the scent of something ordinary, alive, imperfect. She opened her eyes slowly. Morning light pushed through the window blinds in narrow stripes, dust floating like tiny planets. The room was warm, cluttered, real, a small living space that seemed to hum with life. On the wall, a child's drawing hung crookedly beside an old calendar. The floor creaked somewhere near the kitchen. Then she heard it, a voice, low and humming. Malcolm Reed stood by the stove, wearing a faded hoodie and sweatpants, flipping pancakes that were slightly too thick. The radio on the counter murmured a weather report. Storm advisory lifted across most of Nova Scotia. Expect clear skies by noon. Clara tried to sit up, but her ribs protested. She winced, catching her breath. The movement startled him. "You're awake," Malcolm said, turning toward her. His voice was calm, practical. "How's your head?" She touched her temple. The bruise was tender but clean. "It hurts," she admitted, "but not as much as my pride." He managed a small smile. "Breakfast's almost ready. Coffee's strong enough to fix a tire." Clara looked around again, noticing details she had missed last night. The bookshelf made of milk crates, the paper snowflakes taped unevenly across the window, the faint smell of crayons and cinnamon. On the table sat a small vase, or rather an old jar, holding 3 wilted tulips. Everything about this place was unpolished, but it radiated something her penthouse never did: warmth. Zoe appeared from the hallway, hair sticking up like soft feathers. "Daddy, she's awake," she announced proudly, as if reporting breaking news. Malcolm chuckled. "Morning, soldier. You hungry?" Zoe nodded, then looked at Clara. "Do you like pancakes?" Clara hesitated, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "I suppose I do." "Good," Zoe said, satisfied. "Daddy makes them funny looking, but they taste happy." Malcolm rolled his eyes. Flattery runs in the family. The scene felt impossible. Her, a CEO used to boardroom silence, now sitting under a Star Wars blanket, while a stranger's child poured syrup like an artist. Clara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When Malcolm set the plate in front of her, she noticed his hands, rough, scarred from years of work, steady as he placed the fork down. "Eat something," he said. "You lost a bit of blood last night." She took a bite. It was imperfect, overcooked on one side, but it tasted of effort, not presentation. For a moment, no one spoke. The radio filled the silence with a country song about weather and roads. Then Clara broke it. "Why did you help me?" Malcolm looked up from his own plate. The question hung in the air, simple, yet loaded. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because my daughter watches everything I do." Clara blinked. "That's all?" He shrugged. "That's everything." Something in the way he said it landed deep. Clara didn't have children. She had employees, board members, shareholders, people who watched her for weakness, not example. But here was a man who built his entire moral compass around the gaze of a child. She swallowed, throat tight. "You didn't have to risk your life for me." "No," he agreed, "but maybe I needed to." The line hung there, quiet, almost lost beneath the radio static. Zoe broke the silence again, proudly holding up a crayon drawing she'd made while they ate. "This is us," she said. "You're better now. See? The snow stopped." Clara smiled, tracing the stick figures with her eyes. "You're a talented artist, Zoe." The little girl beamed. "I know." Malcolm laughed softly. "Confidence runs in the family, too." When breakfast ended, Clara stood carefully, wincing slightly as she adjusted her coat. Malcolm moved to help, but she waved him off. "I can manage." At the door, she paused. Snow outside had softened into glittering slush. The sky, pale blue. The city waking again after the storm. She turned back to him. "I don't say this lightly, Mr. Reed." "Thank you. I'll make sure this kindness isn't forgotten." He gave a polite nod. "You don't owe me anything." "I wasn't talking about owing," she said. "I was talking about remembering." Their eyes met for a long moment. Two people from different worlds bound for now by a single night of decency. Then she stepped into the cold, closing the door gently behind her. Inside, Zoe peeked through the curtain as the black car picked Clara up from the corner. "She's gone," she whispered. Malcolm nodded. "Back to her big tower, probably." Zoe tugged his sleeve. "Do you think she'll remember us?" He hesitated. "Maybe for a minute." Zoe shook her head with the certainty only a child could have. "No, you saved her, Daddy. That makes you a hero." Malcolm exhaled, smiling despite himself. "Heroes still have to pay rent, kiddo." But when he turned to the window, watching the snow melt into thin silver rivers along the curb, he caught his own reflection, tired but alive. Maybe Zoe was right. Maybe there was a kind of heroism in simply doing the right thing when no one's watching. The radio changed songs, the sun slipped higher, and somewhere in the city, a powerful woman carried a bruise on her forehead and a picture drawn by a little girl. A picture that might just change how she saw the world. By the next morning, the storm had passed, but Malcolm's world was still frozen. His phone buzzed at 7:14 a.m. with the kind of notification that didn't need opening to be understood. The message glowed on the cracked screen. "Account terminated. Contract closed. Thank you for your service." He read it twice, even though once was enough. Then he let the phone fall onto the kitchen table beside Zoe's half-eaten toast. "Daddy," she asked, her small voice muffled by the blanket she was still wrapped in. "You're not going to work today?" Malcolm tried to sound casual. "Guess the app decided I'm on vacation." "Is it a fun one?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet." Outside, sunlight bounced off the melting snow, turning the street into a river of silver. He helped Zoe with her boots, kissed her forehead, and walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped. She waved through the window until the bus turned out of sight. Then the smile left his face. By 10 o'clock, he was in Dartmouth's industrial district, moving between warehouses with a resume in one hand and a growing ache in his chest. Every interview was the same. Polite smiles, subtle rejections, the phrase, "we'll call you," that never meant what it said. At noon, he stopped at a gas station for cheap coffee. He stood by the window, staring out at the half-thawed parking lot, when a sleek black SUV rolled up. For a second, he thought he was hallucinating. The window lowered. Mr. Reed. Clara Whitmore sat inside, sunglasses on, her expression unreadable against the bright snowlight. Malcolm blinked. "You following me now?" "I'm not in the habit of chasing delivery drivers," she said evenly. "But this isn't about habit." She gestured toward the passenger door. "Get in." He hesitated. Pride told him to walk away, but curiosity whispered louder. He got in. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and mint, the opposite of his van's stale coffee scent. Clara handed him a printed document. "Take a look." He frowned, flipping through it. It was an internal company email, time-stamped 2 hours before his failed delivery. The subject line read, "Order cancellation confirmed, Milan Division." Malcolm's stomach dropped. Wait, this was sent before I even got the assignment. Exactly, Clara said, which means that package didn't need to be delivered at all, yet someone filed a complaint the moment it was late. And that complaint came from inside my office. Why? She turned to face him, her eyes sharper than her tone. That's what I want to know. Someone wanted you to look like a failure, and someone wanted me to look distracted. Malcolm exhaled slowly. So you're saying this was a setup? I'm saying, she replied, that in my company, truth is supposed to have a paper trail, but this one was buried, and whoever buried it didn't expect me to dig. He stared out of the window. Snow dripped from the edge of the roof, hitting puddles like soft applause. Why are you showing me this? Because I need someone who understands what happens below the glass floors, she said. Someone who's seen both sides. The people who deliver and the people who decide. He let out a small, bitter laugh. And you think that's me? You already helped once, Clara said quietly. You didn't have to. Now I'm asking you to do it again, but this time, intentionally. Malcolm looked down at the email. The name of the sender, Evan Cross, Arctinova's chief operations officer, sat bold and undeniable. "So what, you want me to be your spy?" "I prefer advisor on ground reality," she said. "Someone who can tell me what's really happening in the logistics, where numbers don't always tell the truth." He folded the papers, his fingers tense. "And what do I get out of it, besides maybe losing another job?" Clara hesitated, then said softly, "A second chance to make things right. For both of us." The words lingered. Outside, a plow rumbled past, scraping away the remnants of last night's storm. The sound felt symbolic, a clearing, or maybe just noise pretending to be one. Malcolm leaned back, thinking of Zoe's crayon drawing now pinned to their fridge. When people fall, others lift them. He didn't trust Clara, not yet. But the truth mattered. And if there was one thing he wanted Zoe to grow up knowing, it was that integrity wasn't for sale, not even for comfort. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Ms. Whitmore, you'll get your truth, but I don't wear a suit, and I don't play politics." "I'm counting on that," she said, allowing herself the faintest smile. That afternoon, Malcolm followed her car to Arctinova's Halifax operations hub, a glass and steel maze humming with quiet authority. Employees moved like synchronized gears, their faces polite but guarded. Clara led him to a small office tucked near the loading docks, half storage, half workspace. "You can set up here," she said. "No nameplate, no titles." He ran his hand along the desk, feeling the hum of nearby machinery. "Feels like home," he muttered. Clara turned to leave but paused in the doorway. "Mr. Reed," she said without looking back. "Don't trust anyone who smiles too easily." He smirked. "Including you." She met his gaze over her shoulder. "Especially me." When she was gone, Malcolm sat alone in the silence. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, steady and dull. He unfolded the printed email again, reading the lines until the ink seemed to whisper its secrets. Order cancellation confirmed. File under Milan Logistics discrepancy. He tapped the paper with one calloused finger. "Truth matters," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Outside, the snow had stopped completely, but the world still felt fragile, like ice just beginning to thaw. And somewhere between the glass towers and the dockyards, two unlikely lives had begun to intertwine. One built on privilege, one on perseverance, both about to learn just how heavy the truth could be. When Malcolm Reed stepped through the revolving glass doors of Arctinova's Toronto headquarters, it felt less like entering a building and more like stepping into another atmosphere, thinner, colder, controlled. The air inside carried a sterile chill, the kind that lived in places where decisions worth millions were made without a heartbeat, out of place. The floor gleamed with reflections of shoes too polished to have ever seen salt or snow. The walls were glass, all of them, transparent but distant, like promises in a contract. A receptionist in a navy suit greeted him with a smile so well-trained it felt artificial. "Welcome to Arctinova, sir. Can I help you?" Malcolm glanced at his visitor badge. The plastic tag read, "Advisor, Field Operations." He still wasn't sure what that actually meant. "Clara Whitmore is expecting me," he said. "Of course." She gestured to a touchpad. "Please, sign in." As he placed his finger on the scanner, the glass elevator behind her opened with a soft chime. Clara stepped out, heels clicking against the marble. She wore a dark coat, her hair tied back in a precise knot. Around her, the atmosphere shifted. People straightened postures, phones lowered, conversations softened. "Mr. Reed," she said, the faintest hint of warmth breaking through her professional tone. "Welcome to the Ice Palace." Malcolm looked up at the towering atrium above them, sunlight filtering through frosted glass panels. "That what they call this place?" "Not officially," she said, "but it fits." He followed her through a maze of corridors lined with digital displays of wind turbines and Arctic ice fields. Arctinova's pride, sustainable energy for the northern frontier. The irony wasn't lost on him. All this talk of renewable warmth in a place that felt emotionally frozen. They reached a restricted level labeled Data Systems Division. Inside, the hum of servers replaced conversation. The temperature dropped another degree. Clara swiped her access card. "Riley," she called. "You have a moment." A man in his 30s looked up from a cluster of monitors. Compact build, sharp eyes, quiet demeanor. His ID read, Riley Tran, Director of Cybersecurity. "Ms. Whitmore," he greeted with a nod, his voice calm but alert. "You're early." "This is Malcolm Reed," Clara introduced. "He'll be assisting with logistics oversight." Riley gave a short, polite handshake. "Ground reality, right? I read the memo." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Guess word travels fast." "In this building, it travels faster than Wi-Fi," Riley said dryly, earning a glance of amusement from Clara. The room was a cathedral of technology. Endless rows of blinking servers, glass partitions, and a faint blue glow that made everyone's skin look pale. On the far wall, massive screens displayed live data streams from Arctinova's Arctic installations, graphs of temperature, turbine output, logistics routes. Clara crossed her arms. "We've had discrepancies in shipment records for 3 weeks. Evan says it's software lag, but—" She trailed off, then looked at Riley. He finished for her. "You don't believe him?" "No," she said simply. Malcolm studied her. "Who's Evan?" "My COO," she replied. "Evan Cross. He oversees all project logistics and data access. Technically, he's my right hand." Her tone hardened. "But lately, that hand's been moving on its own." Riley pulled up a screen filled with spreadsheets. "We've been seeing vendor drop-offs, contracts terminated without authorization, replacements routed through a holding firm called Polarian Holdings. On paper, it looks clean, but the timing's suspicious." Malcolm leaned closer. "How suspicious?" Riley tapped a key, highlighting columns of numbers. "This vendor shift happened the same week your delivery account was suspended." Clara's jaw tightened. "Meaning what?" "Meaning someone needed a distraction," Riley said. "Something loud enough to bury quiet fraud." Malcolm crossed his arms. "So they framed a driver to hide their trail." Riley looked at him, impressed. "You pick up fast." "Years of watching people blame the wrong guy," Malcolm said. Clara walked to the screen, scanning the list of terminated vendors. "These companies, most are small suppliers from Nova Scotia and Ontario, local, independent, easy to squeeze out without noise." Riley nodded, and all their contracts were replaced by Polarian. Same billing address, offshore bank. "Offshore," Malcolm repeated. "Cayman," Riley said flatly. A silence filled the room, the kind that feels colder than air. Finally, Clara spoke. "Evan told me Polarian was a verified logistics partner. I even signed off on their onboarding." "Don't be too hard on yourself," Riley said. "The paperwork was flawless. Forged approval trails, mirrored signatures, encrypted timestamps. It would fool any audit team." Malcolm frowned. "But not you." Riley allowed a small shrug. "I grew up fixing old machines for my dad. If something runs too smooth, it's hiding a jam." Clara exhaled, turning to Malcolm. "I want you to start with the warehouse staff, drivers, procurement clerks, anyone who saw these changes up close. Don't tell them what you're looking for, just listen." "People talk more when they don't know they're confessing," he said. "Exactly," she replied. He glanced at Riley. "And you?" "I'll dig from the digital side," Riley said. "If Evan's moving data through Polarian, there'll be a footprint. Might take time to trace." Malcolm nodded. "You dig the code. I'll dig the dirt." Clara almost smiled. "That's the spirit." Later that afternoon, Malcolm walked through the logistics floor, a long expanse of desks, scanners, and humming conveyor belts. The people there wore practical clothes, spoke in short sentences, and carried the quiet fatigue of those who made things work without ever being seen. He asked simple questions, smiled when needed, listened more than he spoke. Patterns began to emerge. Missing shipments, sudden changes in vendor IDs, replacement orders that never reached their destinations. One man, a forklift operator named Harold, finally muttered what others wouldn't say aloud. "We used to deal with Mapletech supplies," he said. "Local guys." Then overnight, everything switched to some offshore name. New management said it was efficiency. But the new shipments? Half don't match specs. Malcolm wrote it all down. The web was widening, not random mistakes, but a design. As he left the warehouse, the glass walls around him reflected his own face, tired but alert. Somewhere above, in one of those shining offices, someone was watching, counting on the silence to last. But for the first time, Malcolm realized something about silence. It isn't peace. It's the pause before truth breaks through. And inside this ice palace, the ice was beginning to crack. The conference room at ArctiNova's Toronto headquarters felt colder than the Arctic projects it funded. Glass walls, silver table, 12 leather chairs, every inch of it designed to impress and intimidate. Outside, snow drifted past the windows in slow, deliberate spirals, as if time itself was hesitating to enter this space. Malcolm sat at the far end of the table, uncomfortably aware of how out of place he looked. His work jacket was too worn, his boots too heavy for a room where people measured worth in posture and tone. But Clara Whitmore didn't seem to care. She stood at the head of the table, facing Evan Cross, ArctiNova's COO, her second-in-command, and until recently, her most trusted ally. "Let's get this over with," Evan said, his voice slick and rehearsed. "I assume this meeting is about your latest suspicions." "Not suspicions," Clara replied evenly. "Evidence," he smirked. "Evidence from where?" "Your new advisor with the delivery van." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Clara's eyes flicked toward him for half a heartbeat. "Stay calm." Evan leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms like a man welcoming applause. "Come on, Clara. You think a driver and a CEO can audit me?" The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. A few executives at the table shifted uncomfortably. One even looked down, pretending to study a report. Clara didn't flinch. "This isn't an audit," she said quietly. "It's an autopsy." She pressed a button on the screen. The wall behind her flickered to life, revealing a chain of internal emails projected in icy blue light. The timestamps glowed like confession marks. Orders canceled before assignments were issued. Vendor contracts rerouted through Polarian Holdings. Authorizations bearing forged digital signatures. "This message," Clara said, highlighting one email, "was sent from your account, Evan, 2 hours before any official notice was filed." Evan's smirk faltered. "That's impossible." "It's not impossible," said Riley Tran, standing near the back with a laptop in hand. "It's just encrypted forgery. The metadata shows your login key, but the originating IP belongs to an offshore terminal, Cayman Islands." The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the heating system struggling against the storm outside. Evan glanced around, seeking an ally. None met his eyes. Clara took a step closer. "You rerouted our logistics to a shell company, Polarian Holdings, draining millions in inflated invoices. I have documents linking Polarian's accounts to a financial entity called Aurora Capital. Ring any bells?" Evan's expression shifted. Not surprise, but calculation. "You don't understand how the system works, Clara. This is corporate scale. You move a few funds to stabilize markets. It's legal." "It's theft," she said simply. He laughed once, low and sharp. "You're naive. Everyone in this business moves money offshore. You just found out how the real world works." Clara's face remained unreadable. "Then maybe the real world needs reworking." For a long second, the room stood still. The CEO and her COO facing each other across a table that had seen too many compromises. Then she turned to the board members seated around them. I'm placing Evan Cross under immediate suspension pending investigation, Clara said, voice steady but cold. Riley will secure the servers. Legal will file notice to the provincial regulators. Evan shot up from his chair. You can't do this. But his protest was drowned out by the quiet authority in her tone. I just did. The security officer near the door stepped forward, hesitating only slightly before escorting him out. The door shut behind them with a sound that felt heavier than it should have, like the first crack of ice before the thaw. When the room finally cleared, Clara sank into her chair, the adrenaline fading. The snow outside had thickened again, the city dimming under gray light. Riley closed his laptop. He'll lawyer up. I know, Clara said softly. And Aurora Capital won't just watch. They've invested too much to let this die quietly. Malcolm leaned on the table. Aurora Capital, that's the offshore outfit you mentioned. She nodded. Private equity firm out of Zurich. On paper, they're funding clean energy. In reality, they're siphoning tech and selling patents to foreign buyers. Riley added, and Cross was their man on the inside. Clara rubbed her temples. Which means this isn't over. It's barely begun. Malcolm studied her face. The exhaustion, the weight of someone used to being in control but now standing on a fault line. You did what you had to do, he said quietly. She looked up. You think that matters to people like Aurora? It matters to me, he said simply. For the first time, she didn't have a reply. Riley glanced at both of them, then at the window. You should both go. The storm's turning again. Minutes later, Clara and Malcolm stepped out of the building into a curtain of falling snow. The wind howled down Bay Street, erasing their footprints as fast as they appeared. Neither spoke. The world was white, breath visible in the cold air. The city's hum muffled under the weight of weather and consequence. They walked side by side, past cars half buried in snow, their silence louder than any argument. Somewhere behind them, the lights of Arctinova's tower glowed like a frozen beacon, beautiful, cold, and cracking from within. At the corner, Clara stopped, her face pale against the storm. She looked at Malcolm, a man who didn't belong in her world, yet somehow anchored it. He met her eyes, reading the unspoken exhaustion there, the fear, the flicker of respect. No words passed between them. None were needed. For now, there was only the snow, falling, relentless, honest, and in that silence, something fragile but certain began to take root. Trust, the kind that isn't declared in meetings or contracts, but in moments when the world turns cold, and two people keep walking anyway. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Toronto under a thick crust of silence. The city gleamed, pale, hollow, and deceptively calm. Inside Arctinova, calm was an illusion too. Riley Tran hadn't slept. His office looked like the aftermath of a digital hurricane. Cables tangled across the floor, two monitors showing endless lines of code, and a half-empty cup of Vietnamese coffee gone cold beside his keyboard. Claire and Malcolm stood behind him, watching as the streams of data scrolled faster than the eye could follow. "Tell me you found something," Clara said quietly. Riley didn't look up. Found more than something. He tapped a key, and a cluster of highlighted transactions appeared, small amounts at first, but repeating with mathematical precision. These are micropayments made over the last 8 months. Different vendor IDs, same source. Malcolm squinted. How can you tell they're connected? The digital fingerprint, Riley replied. Same encryption format, same origin tag. AR. It's a hidden marker used by someone with serious banking privileges. Clara frowned. AR? Riley turned to face her. Aurora Capital, or more specifically, the man behind it, Alden Ross. The name landed like a cold wind in the room. Clara had heard it before, whispered in corporate corridors, printed in offshore filings. A ghost that moved billions but left no trace of footprints. Riley continued. Ross uses a multi-layered laundering system. He sends small, clean payments into accounts like Evan's, spreads them across vendor contracts, then reinvests the profits into Aurora's renewable subsidiaries. On paper, it looks like eco-investment. In reality, it's washing dirty money through clean energy. So Arctinova's been the wash cycle, Malcolm muttered. Riley nodded grimly. Exactly. Clara's hands clenched on the back of Riley's chair. How deep? Deep enough that your entire board could collapse if this goes public without proof. Aurora owns silent stakes in at least 4 of your partner firms. They're using your reputation as cover. Malcolm exhaled slowly. So even firing Evan didn't stop it. He was just the middleman. Right, Riley said. And Ross, he's the architect. Clara stepped back, pacing toward the glass wall that overlooked the snowy skyline. If we expose this now, Aurora will spin it, make it look like Arctinova was complicit. Malcolm looked at her. And if we don't, then we become complicit for real. The words hung between them, heavy, inevitable. That evening, Malcolm drove east along the highway toward Halifax, the city where his story had begun. He needed more than digital proof. He needed something physical, something that would speak louder than spreadsheets. He called an old friend, Leon Baptiste, who worked security at the harbor. They'd grown up together, 2 kids who dreamed of the open ocean, only for life to anchor them in colder waters. The port was quiet under the sodium lamps when Malcolm arrived. Ships loomed like sleeping beasts, their metal hulls creaking in the cold wind. Leon met him near Dock 14, hands shoved into a parka. "You look like hell, brother," he said. Malcolm smirked. "You should see the people trying to kill my career." Leon chuckled. "What are you looking for?" "Containers shipped under Arctinova's name. Last 6 months. Destination tags don't match manifest routes. I think someone's moving hardware under false labels." Leon frowned. "You talking smuggling?" "Not weapons, not drugs. Energy tech, wind converter cores, cryocells, rare earth rotors. Stuff worth millions in research." Leon rubbed his chin. "That's not small-time theft. You're stepping on corporate giants." "I'm already standing in their shadows," Malcolm said. "Might as well shine a light." They moved through the docks, the sound of waves slapping against frozen hulls. Leon used his clearance card to access the shipment database inside a small office. The hum of old fluorescent lights filled the space. After a few minutes of typing, Leon whistled. "You're not crazy. Look here. 6 containers registered as maintenance equipment, but the contents log says lithium-ion chambers marked as property of Polarian Holdings." "Polarian again," Malcolm said under his breath. Leon turned the monitor toward him. "Destination, Murmansk, Russia. Transit via Aurora Capital's logistics line." Malcolm leaned closer. "They're exporting green tech for cash, selling it off to whoever pays highest, then funneling it back into sustainability projects." Leon nodded grimly. "And using Arctinova as the perfect front." Malcolm took photos of the screen with his phone, each click sounding like a nail in a coffin. When he stepped back into the freezing night, his breath turned white. He called Clara immediately. "I've got proof," he said. "They're shipping our energy systems under fake manifests. Aurora's selling tech overseas. Russia, maybe more." There was silence on the other end. Then Clara's voice, low, steady, furious. "Then it's not about money anymore," she said. "It's about control." Back in Toronto, Riley's system pinged with a new data trace. An internal email from an encrypted Aurora domain, triggered by Malcolm's call. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "They're listening," he muttered. By the time Clara and Malcolm returned to Arctinova the next morning, Riley had built a digital map sprawling across the wall. A spiderweb of lines connected offshore accounts, shell vendors, and names hidden under code aliases. At the center pulsed a single word, Aurora. Clara stared at it. If we pull this thread, the whole company unravels. Malcolm crossed his arms. Then let it unravel. Better to rebuild clean than live dirty. She turned to him, seeing the truth in his eyes, the same grounded conviction she'd once mistaken for defiance. For a moment, the CEO and the delivery man stood in the same light, equals not in title, but in purpose. Clara spoke softly, almost to herself. Then we clean this company, she said, or we lose everything trying. Riley looked up from his monitor, lips tightening into a faint smile. Then I guess we'd better get our hands dirty first. The wind outside howled again, shaking the glass, but this time the sound wasn't threatening. It was a call, a warning, and a beginning, because in the shadows of Aurora, light was finally starting to fight back. The snow had stopped falling, but the city hadn't thawed. Inside Arctinova's tower, the lights still glowed, white, sterile, unblinking, as if refusing to acknowledge the storm that was gathering beneath its glass skin. Clara Whitmore stood alone in her office, facing the skyline of Toronto. The board meeting was in 3 hours. The evidence against Aurora was ready. The forged contracts, the laundering trail, the offshore accounts. One press conference and the truth would detonate like sunlight in a dark room. Her phone buzzed once. A message appeared. No number, just a gray bubble. If you go public, the child pays the price. For a heartbeat, Clara didn't understand. Then her stomach dropped. She tried calling Malcolm. No answer. She called the school. The secretary's voice was calm. Too calm. Zoe was just picked up by her father. Relief, sharp and brief, hit first. Then fear. If they knew about Zoe, it meant the fight had turned personal. Malcolm had received the same anonymous text 5 minutes earlier. He was standing outside the loading bay, the wind cutting through his jacket, when the words appeared on his screen. He didn't hesitate. He raced through Halifax traffic, tires sliding on half-melted snow, and pulled up to the small elementary school where Zoe was playing in the yard. She looked up, surprised. "Daddy, you're early." He smiled tightly, forcing calm. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're taking a little trip." Within minutes, he had packed a small bag, grabbed her favorite blanket, and driven east toward the coast. The old Nova Scotia highway wound through pines and frozen marshland until it reached the sea. There, hidden behind a cliff near Lunenburg, was a weathered cabin that once belonged to his uncle. Small, drafty, but safe. He built a fire while Zoe drew pictures on scrap paper, unaware of the fear tightening his chest. Every sound outside, wind, branch, sea, felt like a footstep coming closer. When his phone buzzed again, it wasn't another threat. It was Clara. "Where are you?" He hesitated before replying. "Somewhere no one's supposed to find us." 2 hours later, headlights cut through the falling dusk. Clara's SUV pulled into the snow-packed drive. She stepped out, hair disheveled, face pale with exhaustion. Malcolm met her at the door, eyes cold but steady. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," she said, voice trembling. "They know about Zoe." "You think I don't know that?" He snapped, then softened, lowering his voice. "She's fine. She's inside." Clara exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest as if to slow her heart. "This is my fault." "No," he said. "It's Ross's fault, and whoever's still feeding him from inside." Clara stepped into the cabin, taking in the modest warmth, the crackling fire, the kettle whistling faintly, Zoe humming to herself by the table. The simplicity of it, the peace of a world she rarely touched, hit her harder than any boardroom confrontation. She crouched beside the girl. "Hey, Zoe." Zoe looked up, smiling. "Hi, Miss Clara. Daddy says you're his friend from the big building." Clara's throat tightened. "Something like that." Zoe held up her drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a little house by the sea. Above them, in bright crayon letters, she'd written, "Trust Crew." "This is you, Daddy, and me," Zoe explained. "We're the crew. We keep promises." Clara blinked back tears. "That's beautiful." Later that night, When Zoe had fallen asleep under her blanket, Malcolm and Clara sat near the fire. The waves outside hit the rocks with a slow, relentless rhythm, like time refusing to stop. Clara stared into the flames. "He threatened your daughter because of my war." Malcolm looked at her. "Then it's our war now." She shook her head. "You don't owe me this. You should take Zoe somewhere far away, somewhere safe." "Safe?" He laughed bitterly. "There's no safe anymore, Clara. Not when people like Ross decide who gets to breathe easy." Silence. The fire crackled, painting their faces in flickering orange. Clara's voice softened. "You remind me of my father." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "He worked in energy, too." "No," she said, smiling faintly. "He believed in people who did the right thing, even when it cost them everything." He met her gaze. "Then I guess I'm old-fashioned. Or brave." He shook his head. "I'm just a dad trying to make sure my kid grows up in a world where good still means something." Outside, the wind rose, howling over the cliffs. Clara moved closer to the fire, her hands trembling slightly. "I've spent years thinking power meant control," she whispered. "But tonight, I feel powerless. And somehow, that's clearer than anything." Malcolm looked toward Zoe, sleeping peacefully by the window. "Maybe power isn't control," he said. "Maybe it's who you choose to protect." She nodded slowly, the words settling in her like an answer she hadn't known she needed. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Clara dozed off in the armchair, her head tilted toward the window. Malcolm sat awake, staring into the night, listening to the sea, the wind, the fragile rhythm of safety that might not last till morning. He checked his phone again. No new messages, no movement on the security feed. For now, the darkness outside was just darkness. But he knew it wouldn't stay that way. Somewhere out there, Alden Ross, or whatever shadow called itself Aurora now, was still watching, still calculating. Malcolm looked back at the table where Zoe's drawing lay. 3 figures holding hands, smiling against the storm. He whispered to himself, "Trust crew, huh?" and smiled faintly. Then his voice hardened, low but certain. "Let's see how far trust can fight." Outside, the ocean roared, cold, vast, and alive, as if the world itself had decided to listen. And in that cabin by the sea, 3 lives. 1 father, 1 CEO, 1 child stood quietly against the tide. The war had turned human now, and the night, for all its darkness, had begun to flicker with light. Snow drifted again over Halifax, soft and unhurried, the kind of snow that made even the hardest truths look gentle for a moment. But inside Riley Tran's apartment, nothing felt gentle. The room was dark except for the pale glow of 3 monitors, screens filled with lines of code, security gateways, and encrypted data chains. Riley's fingers moved fast, methodical, and silent. Each keystroke was a risk, each upload an act of rebellion. At the center of the screen was a single document, the original contract between Aurora Capital and Evan Cross, complete with routing numbers, hidden payouts, and Alden Ross's digital signature buried deep within the metadata. He whispered under his breath, "No more shadows." Then he clicked send. The file zipped through a secure channel straight to the Canadian Securities Administration, CSA, along with a brief affidavit signed only with 3 words, "For truth's sake." He sat back, heart pounding, watching the progress bar fill. When it reached 100%, he closed his laptop, exhaled, and whispered a small prayer in Vietnamese, something his mother used to say when storms were coming. Kuan Han Jo the help others, and heaven will help you. By morning, the news had begun to move, quietly at first, whispers in financial circles, sudden calls between investors, the subtle tremor that always comes before an earthquake. By noon, it was no longer quiet. CSA investigates Aurora Capital ties to Arctinova Co. The headline lit up across business networks. And somewhere between Bay Street and the frozen docks of Halifax, Clara Whitmore decided she was done hiding. The community center at North Harbor wasn't grand. Chipped paint, flickering lights, and a heater that coughed like an old man. But it was where her father had once given free lectures on renewable energy, and where she had learned that progress meant nothing without people to share it with. Outside, reporters gathered, local first, then national. Inside, Clara stood behind a plain wooden podium. No logos, no PR team, no teleprompter. Just her and a single microphone. Snowflakes drifted through the open doors, melting on the floor. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice steady despite the weight pressing on every word. "For too long, Arc de Nova, the company my father built, has been used to fund greed under the disguise of innovation." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked softly. "We discovered that certain executives colluded with Aurora Capital, a foreign financial entity, to manipulate contracts and export proprietary technology under false pretenses. Today, that truth has been turned over to the proper authorities." Someone in the back shouted, "Does this mean Arc de Nova is finished?" Clara looked up, the snow catching in, her hair like silver dust. "No," she said simply, "because innovation means nothing if it forgets humanity. And if we must rebuild, we will rebuild honestly." There was no applause at first, just silence. Then one clap, then another, until the sound filled the small hall, echoing against the old walls like a heartbeat returning after a long silence. At the back of the crowd, Malcolm Reed watched her. He stood by the door, snow still on his jacket, the cold still on his face. But his chest felt warm in a way he hadn't felt in years. She didn't look like a CEO up there, not the polished, unreachable woman from the glass tower. She looked real. A woman standing in the storm, not above it. The light from the camera flashes caught her face, reflecting off the falling snow, and for a moment Malcolm thought she looked almost fragile, not weak, but human in a way that power rarely allows. He remembered what she had said in the cabin. Maybe power isn't control. Maybe it's who you choose to protect. Now he understood. She wasn't protecting her company anymore. She was protecting her father's promise, and everything decent still left in it. The next hours unfolded like an avalanche. News networks broadcast her speech across the country. Hashtags trended. Commentators debated whether she was a whistleblower or a visionary. Arc de Nova's stock plummeted 14% by sunset. But outside the markets, something else rose: trust. Communities from Nova Scotia to Alberta shared her statement online. Environmental groups called it the courage corporate Canada forgot. Workers from Arc de Nova's lower branches, janitors, drivers, technicians, sent her quiet messages of gratitude. Riley watched it all unfold from his apartment, a rare smile flickering across his tired face. "It's moving," he murmured. She did it. That night, as the snow thickened again, Malcolm waited outside the community center. The crowd had dispersed. The reporters had gone home to write their stories. Clara finally stepped out, her hair damp with melted flakes, exhaustion written across her face, but fire still burning behind her eyes. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wanted to see it," he replied. "You, up there, speaking truth without armor." She smiled faintly. "You think it'll change anything?" He shrugged. "Maybe not tomorrow, but someday someone will remember today, and they'll know not everyone sold their soul for a paycheck." She looked at him, really looked, then nodded. "Thank you, Malcolm, for standing when everyone else stepped back." He smiled. It's what crews do. Snow swirled between them, soft and relentless. From somewhere across the street, a child's voice echoed, Zoe, waving from Riley's car window, holding up her drawing again. "Trust crew." Clara laughed, the sound breaking through the winter air like sunlight through clouds. Malcolm looked at her. and for the first time in a long while, the world felt possible again. The boardroom in Ottawa felt less like a place of discussion and more like a battlefield disguised in marble and glass. The emergency meeting had been called within 24 hours of Clara's public statement. Snow still clung to the corners of the Parliament district, but inside, the air was thick with tension. The city's power brokers, investors, advisors, and lawyers had gathered around a table long enough to seat a dozen egos and a million doubts. At the head of the table sat Clara Whitmore, calm but pale, her hands resting lightly on the stack of files before her. Across from her, Charles Hargrove, the oldest board member, leaned forward. His voice, low and controlled, carried the quiet weight of menace. "Clara," he began, "your press stunt has cost us $27 million in market value. Aurora's representatives are offering a buyout that could stabilize our shareholders and—" Clara cut him off, voice steady but cold. "A buyout from the same organization that corrupted this company in the first place? You'd hand them the keys and call it stability?" Charles's lips tightened. Sometimes survival requires compromise. "Survival," Clara said, "isn't the same as surrender." She stood, her reflection tall against the window that overlooked a gray, frozen river. "The heart of a company isn't its profit," she said, her tone clear and cutting. "It's its people, the engineers who worked through the nights, the drivers who delivered in storms, the janitors who kept the lights burning when the power went out. Without them, there is no Arctinova, only numbers in someone else's portfolio." A murmur rippled through the room. Some eyes softened, others hardened. Charles leaned back, unimpressed. "Idealism doesn't pay dividends." "Neither does corruption," she shot back. The air shifted, colder, sharper. From the far end of the table, Miriam Holt, one of the company's senior advisors and the lone undecided vote, watched quietly. Her expression was unreadable, her pen tapping lightly against her notebook. Everyone knew she held the deciding voice. And then, unexpectedly, the door opened. Malcolm Reed stepped in. He wasn't in a suit, just a dark jacket still dusted with Halifax snow. A man who looked entirely out of place among polished board members, yet every head turned toward him. Charles frowned. "This is a private session." Clara met Malcolm's eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. Then she turned to the room. "I invited him." Charles scoffed. "A delivery man? This is absurd." Malcolm didn't flinch. "Then let me say something absurd," he replied quietly. The room fell still. He walked to the center, pausing by Clara's chair. "A few months ago," he began, "I was just another driver trying to make rent. One morning, I delivered a package late to this company. Your CEO here," he nodded at Clara, "told me I'd cost millions. She wasn't wrong. But that night, when a storm hit and a car crashed outside my building, I was the one who pulled her out of it. No one moved. Even Charles looked uneasy. I didn't know her name mattered. I didn't know what her company stood for. I just knew someone needed help. That's what people like me do. We help, even when it costs us." He looked around the room, straight at the board members hiding behind their tablets and polished shoes. "And that's the problem with all this. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that companies aren't built by numbers. They're built by people, the ones you never see, the ones who keep believing the work means something." He turned to Clara. "She hasn't forgotten. That's why I'm here." The silence was different now, no longer defensive, but reflective. Miriam Holt set her pen down. Her eyes met Malcolm's, then Clara's. "You've said enough," she murmured, her voice low but resolute. "And I've heard enough." She reached for the digital voting pad in front of her. The boardroom screen lit up. 11 names, 11 votes. Green for approval, red for denial. One by one, the colors appeared. Red, red, green, green. And then Miriam's light turned green. A quiet gasp swept through the room. Clara exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally breaking. Charles stared at the screen in disbelief. "You've doomed this company," he hissed. Miriam shook her head. "No, Charles, she's saved it." Hours later, the headlines broke across every major outlet. Arctinova board blocks, Aurora buyout. Internal reform approved, former COO Evan Cross arrested in fraud and money laundering scandal. Aurora Capital under international investigation. In downtown Ottawa, reporters crowded the steps of Arctinova's headquarters, cameras flashing as Claire and Malcolm exited together. She looked exhausted, but radiant, the kind of tired that comes from fighting the right battle. A journalist shouted, "Ms. Whitmore, what happens next?" Clara paused, then smiled faintly. "We rebuild, with clean hands." Malcolm stood beside her, snowflakes catching in his hair. For once, the world wasn't divided by class, titles, or suits, just people who chose truth over convenience. He looked toward the sky, where flakes drifted under pale sunlight, and murmured, "Looks like the storm's finally breaking." Clara followed his gaze, her voice soft but certain. "No, Malcolm, it's just beginning to clear." And, together, they stepped forward, into the cold, into the light, into whatever came next. No longer alone. Spring arrived in Halifax like a slow exhale. The snow melted off the wharves, gulls returned to the harbor, and the wind that once howled through broken factory windows now carried the scent of new paint, coffee, and hope. The Arctinova Tower, once a symbol of cold ambition, stood transformed. The mirrored logo had been removed, the polished glass cleaned not for prestige, but for clarity, and above the front doors, newly carved in steel, hung the company's new name, Arctinova Foundation Community Energy. Human power. Inside, the air no longer felt sterile. The sharp click of high heels had been replaced by the softer rhythm of collaboration, the sound of workers, engineers, and volunteers walking the same floor as equals. The building pulsed again, but with a different current. Purpose. Clara Whitmore walked the main floor, clipboard in hand, hair tied loosely, wearing not a suit, but a simple gray sweater. She looked around. Solar prototypes lined the walls. Students from the local university were soldering parts, and a group of retirees from Dartmouth were being trained to maintain small-scale wind units for rural communities. This was what she'd fought for. Not control, not prestige, but renewal. At the far end of the hall, a familiar voice called out, "You're late for your own tour." Malcolm Reed stood there, a smudge of grease on his jacket, holding a wrench and a half-assembled turbine blade. His badge read, Director of Field Operations and Integrity. Clara smiled faintly. "I see you've settled into the title." He grinned, still trying to figure out which part of it means fixing everything people break. "Probably both." He chuckled. "Well, integrity's the harder one." She nodded. "That's why you're the only one I trust with it." For a moment, they just stood there, the hum of work surrounding them, sunlight breaking through the skylights like gold over steel. In the cybersecurity wing upstairs, Riley Tran was at his usual post, a wall of screens surrounding him, data streams flowing like rivers of light. But this time, there were no secrets to hide. His work now focused on transparency audits, helping local startups learn to protect themselves from corporate fraud. Miriam Holt visited often, not as a board member, but as a mentor. Her sharp tone softened these days, her laughter more frequent. Not bad for a guy who once hacked his own company, she teased one afternoon. Riley smiled. Not bad for a woman who once voted to save it. Miriam chuckled. Fair enough. They both looked out of the window at the community garden being built beside the tower. Volunteers planting rows of sunflowers, each labeled with a name of an Arctinova employee who'd stayed through the storm. Downstairs, in what used to be the company's sleek reception lobby, now stood the Energy Lab, a hands-on space where families and students could learn about renewable energy. A small plaque by the entrance read, "For those who kept the lights on when the world went dark." That line had been Malcolm's idea. Claire approved it instantly. The official reopening was quiet, intentionally so. No fireworks, no shareholders, no journalists waiting for headlines. Just people. The kind who believed in work, in second chances, in decency. Clara gave a short address to the staff and volunteers gathered in the atrium. Her voice carried softly through the glass halls. "When I first stood in this building," she said, "it was full of mirrors, walls that reflected only power, not truth. Today, those mirrors are gone. Now this place reflects something else. Us." Applause rippled through the room. She turned to Malcolm, standing beside her. Arc de Novo was built on innovation, but today it stands on integrity. That's what will keep it standing. She gestured to the new banner being unfurled above them, the same phrase Malcolm had painted by hand on the factory door in Halifax months ago. Integrity keeps us standing. The crowd went still. Then slowly they clapped. Not the corporate kind of applause, but the sound of genuine pride. Later that afternoon, Clara found herself walking through the new reading corner on the ground floor. Soft chairs, shelves of donated books, and a hand-painted sign hung by the window. Zoe's Light. It had been Zoe's idea. A corner for workers' children with books about science, nature, and courage. The plaque below read, "For every child who believes kindness can power the world." Zoe herself sat cross-legged on the carpet, reading to two younger kids. When she saw Clara, she waved enthusiastically. "Miss Clara, we have story time every Thursday now." Clara knelt beside her. "That's wonderful, Zoe. What's today's story?" Zoe grinned. "It's called The Girl Who Fixed the Sky." Clara's smile softened. "And how does it end?" "With everyone helping her," Zoe said simply. "Because the sky's too big for one person." Clara blinked back the sting of tears. "That's a perfect ending." That evening, as dusk settled over Halifax, the tower glowed, not with sterile office lights, but with warm gold from the solar panels powering its new grid. On the rooftop, Malcolm stood with Claire and Riley, overlooking the harbor. Fishing boats drifted lazily beneath the horizon, and the city pulsed quietly below, alive again. "So," Riley said, hands in his pockets, "what now?" Claire took a deep breath of the salt air. "Now we make sure this place doesn't just run on clean energy, it runs on clean hearts." Malcolm nodded, eyes on the lights of the town. "You think that's possible?" She looked at him, the wind tugging at her hair. "I think it already is." For a while, no one spoke. The moment didn't need words. The air carried them. The sound of gulls, of wind against glass, of a city finally breathing again. Clara turned to leave, pausing beside Malcolm. "You know, for a driver, you've got good leadership instincts." He smiled. "For a CEO, you've got a decent sense of direction." They both laughed quietly, a sound lighter than the wind. Riley shook his head. "You two should really put that on the next banner." Clara smiled. "No, the next one's Zoe's turn." As night settled, the lights of Arc de Novo Foundation glimmered over the harbor like lanterns in the dark, steady, unwavering, alive. Inside, in the reading corner, Zoe had fallen asleep with her head on a book. The words "Trust Crew" scribbled on its cover. Malcolm carried her gently to the car, tucking her blanket around her. Clara held the door open, the quiet between them filled with something deeper than words. A shared peace earned the hard way. He looked back once at the building, its new sign shining against the night. "Integrity keeps us standing." And for the first time in a long while, he believed it wasn't just a motto. It was a promise kept. Spring arrived not as a stranger this time, but as an old friend returning home. The ice that had once locked the Halifax harbor cracked apart with a sigh, releasing the slow rhythm of waves beneath. The sea, once gray and merciless, shimmered blue again, carrying sunlight across the docks like a living mirror. Fishermen mended their nets. Children chased gulls between the wooden piers. The air smelled of salt and paint, the scent of things rebuilt. On the boardwalk, Malcolm Reed walked beside Clara Whitmore and Zoe, the little girl skipping between them, her hands swinging like tiny pendulums of joy. The sky was cloudless. The horizon glowed gold. Ahead, a row of new solar panels curved along the water's edge, each panel engraved with a small circular emblem, the Arctinova Foundation logo, now reimagined in brushed steel and soft blue. When sunlight hit it just right, the word integrity flashed like a heartbeat. Clara stopped to adjust her sunglasses, watching the reflections dance across the sea. "You know," she said quietly, "a year ago, I couldn't even see this far ahead. Everything felt frozen. The company, the people, me." Malcolm looked at her. "Ice doesn't last forever. It just needs a little warmth to remember how to melt." She smiled faintly. "You always say things that sound simple but end up being true." "Blame Zoe," he said, glancing down. "She's been giving me her quotes of the day." Zoe giggled. "Today's quote is, 'If the sun can come back after winter, so can we.'" Clara laughed, full and clear, the kind of laugh that didn't sound like a CEO anymore, just a woman grateful to breathe. They reached the end of the pier, where the harbor widened into open water. There, mounted on a low pedestal, stood a plaque, newly unveiled just a week before. The words were simple, in honor of those who chose the light, even when the world was dark. Arctinova Foundation, Halifax Renewal Project. Malcolm brushed his fingers over the engraved letters. He remembered the nights of wind and fear, the hiss of broken glass, the smell of cold metal, and the moment he decided to keep going, not for heroism, but for a small girl who once said, "Be kind, even if they aren't." He looked up. Clara was watching him, her expression quiet, but full of understanding. She didn't need to speak. The harbor spoke for them both. They stopped by the new community installation, rows of compact solar units lined along the pier, each connected to a digital display showing how much clean energy was being generated for the local neighborhoods. Children gathered around, pointing and cheering when the numbers rose. One little boy asked, "Does it really make power?" Zoe stepped forward proudly. "Yes, my dad helped build it, and Miss Clara made sure everyone could use it for free." The boy's mother smiled at Clara. "You're the one from the news, right? The lady who turned a company into a foundation?" Clara looked a little embarrassed. "That's one way to put it." Malcolm grinned. "The fancy way. We just say she decided to do the right thing." The woman nodded, her eyes kind. "Well, whatever you did, thank you. My brother got his first steady job here in years." Clara's lips curved softly. "Then it was worth it." They moved on, leaving behind laughter and the hum of solar panels feeding power back into the grid, invisible threads of light running through the veins of the city. By midday, the sun stood high. They reached a small cafe overlooking the harbor, one of those family-owned places that smelled like maple, butter, and stories. They sat by the window, steam fogging the glass as they sipped hot chocolate and coffee. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Clara finally broke it. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night? If you'd just kept walking?" Malcolm stirred his cup slowly. "Every once in a while. But I don't think about what I'd have missed. I think about what I'd have become." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze. "That night, I had every reason to walk away, every excuse to be bitter. But then I saw Zoe's drawing on the fridge, the one that said, 'When people fall, others lift them.' I realized if I didn't live by that, I'd be lying to her and to myself." Clara smiled, eyes glistening. You didn't just lift me, Malcolm. You helped me remember what matters. Outside, the light shifted. The kind of light that makes water look like glass and time feel slower. Later, they walked again, following the curve of the shoreline, where wind turbines turned slowly in the distance, their blades glinting against the sky. Zoe ran ahead, hopping between puddles. She stopped near the edge of the pier, squinting toward the horizon where gulls wheeled in circles. "Daddy?" she called. Malcolm jogged over. "Yeah, baby?" She pointed toward the open water. "Are the bad people gone now?" He hesitated, looking out at the sea, the sky, the city rebuilt from the ashes of greed. The question hung there, simple yet enormous. He crouched beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe not all," he said softly, "but now we know how to face them." Zoe nodded, satisfied with that kind of wisdom only children can truly accept. Behind them, Clara stood watching, wind tugging her hair, the sun catching in her eyes. The warmth that spread across her face wasn't just from the light, but from something deeper, peace. The three of them stood there for a long time. No speeches, no cameras, just the quiet music of waves slapping against the wood and the gentle hum of energy flowing from sun to steel, from steel to heart. The wind carried faint laughter from the city, mingled with the cry of gulls. A child's kite rose high into the sky, red against the white-blue air. Halifax gleamed, not rich, not perfect, but honest. And over it all, like an invisible current, ran a truth that had outlasted the storm. In a country built on ice and light, the warmest power is still integrity. Malcolm took Clara's hand. Zoe ran ahead, her laughter spilling across the boardwalk like sunlight. They followed her, three figures framed against a city reborn, walking toward the bright horizon where water met sky, where every ending became a beginning again.